Good morning. Let me just get set up. This time I'm going to press start on my timer. And that way, there we go. Oh, all right. Gosh, when I first came in, it was half empty, and now it's like, where did you all come from? That's great. Well, this is the third week of a series that we are presenting here at the center, a 7-week series that we are calling Dream Yourself Alive. And they're based 7 weeks, 7 chakras, and the talks and the substance of the talks are all based on the book Courageous Dreaming by Alberto Villoldo. And it's a fantastic book by a man who's a shaman and an anthropologist. And also, since this is the third week and we're dealing with chakras, and the third week is all about self-empowerment, for those of you who are doing the prayer sticks, the chakra color this week is yellow. It's the third chakra, yellow, golden. And the third chakra is this. It's the navel chakra. That's the chakra right at the navel. And it's known for the digestion or the gut. Important things, right? The gut feeling and the digestion is certainly important in our lives. And the spiritual meaning of the third chakra is personal power, and it deals with our fears and anxieties. Not that anybody here has any of those whatsoever. And it also governs expansiveness, spirituality, all matters of growth, achievement, energy, dynamism, willpower, and most important for today in the talk I'm going to give, it is the chakra that is associated with the action of movement, which certainly in digestion is good, right? Thank you for laughing at that. So that's what we're talking about today, is that this concept of self-empowerment, the practice of self-empowerment, which takes self-empowerment out of a thing and into something that we can do. And early on in this book, Courageous Dreaming, Alberto Villoldo tells the story of when he was a young anthropologist, and he traveled down to the Amazon forest to study with these healing shamans, to learn from them. And he decided he was going to use himself as a test study so that they could work with him in healing. So he takes one of the shamans aside and he starts to tell his story. Now, you know, we all got our stories, right? We can tell it at the drop of a hat. Is there this weird reverb coming through? Do you guys hear that? Okay, good. So he's telling the shaman this story of his life, and what he says to them is, he says, I explained to this jungle medicine man that as a child, I'd fled my country of birth because of a communist revolution. I had seen bloodshed in the streets and been terrified by gunfire in the night. Since then, I'd suffered from recurring nightmares in which armed men would force their way into my home and take away my loved ones. At the time, I was in my late 20s, yet I'd been unable to enter into a lasting relationship for fear that I'd lose the person that I loved, just like my nightmares. Heal me. So the medicine man looks at him and says this. He says, you can either have what you want, or you can have all the reasons why you can't. And then he says this, if that wasn't bracing enough, he says, you are too enamored with your story. Until you dare to dream a different dream, all you will have is your nightmare. Pretty heavy stuff. Pretty bracing. I think that he was probably expecting something a little bit more like, oh, you poor thing. But that's not what he got. So this is about self-empowerment. Now, I'm going to tell a story about self-empowerment, and this is one of my favorite stories, not just to tell, but to experience all over again in my life, because it's something that happened to me years ago when I was in my 20s. And I've told this story before, so those of you who have heard the story before, it's a great story to hear again. I need to hear it again over and over in my life. And it's a story of when I lived in Denver, Colorado, years and years ago. Well, not that many years ago. And I lived there, and I had a public job, so I was always getting invited to go to events or this or that and show up. And I got invited to go see this Buddhist monk who was going to speak at this mansion in Boulder, Colorado. How many of you have been to Boulder? A few of you. So those of you who have been there know Boulder is this gorgeous, beautiful city right in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Very spiritual community, very like Berkeley in the Midwest. It's very, very beautiful there. Lots of money in Boulder. It's a very affluent place to go. And so this monk was going to speak at somebody's house, really this kind of mansion, right in the foothills, right on the outskirts of Boulder. And I got invited to go. So I drive up to Boulder from Denver, and I pull into the estate gates, and they have like this whole area filled with cars. And they had Jaguars and Lexuses and BMWs and Mercedes, and there I am in my little Ford Festiva, which they don't even make anymore, but for those of you who didn't know, that's like the bottom of the Ford Festivas. That's like less than a K car was, it's like Yugo. It was really not a fancy car, but I loved it, and I was proud to drive my little Ford Festiva into this place, parking right between a Mercedes and a Jaguar, and I showed up at the door into this beautiful house. And it's one of those showcase houses that you see on those shows on HGTV, one of those kinds of houses, and walked in and it's gorgeous. The first thing you see is a whole wall that's just a window looking out onto the Rocky Mountains. And you turn around and there's a whole wall over here that's a window looking down onto the city of Boulder. Beautiful. And nice furniture. Ooh, it was just gorgeous. Such nice carpeting, we all had to take our shoes off. And people were wearing gorgeous clothes. But I mean, it was like jeans and t-shirts, but those jeans and t-shirts cost more than I made in at least 2 weeks. I mean, these were like sushi people and jewels and all this stuff. And we were walking around and everybody was acting very spiritual. VSP, Julia Cameron calls them very spiritual people. Everybody, oh, nice to see you, and doing the little bows and all this stuff. It was very nice. And in the meantime, there were servers in white jackets with trays with nice hors d'oeuvres and canapes, all vegan, of course, going around. And people were serving wine. And it was really a scene, These were the top of the top. These were people who had achieved so much. The money in that room was so head-swimming for me. And they were powerful people. And the reason I mention all that is because all of these people were here to get wisdom from a monk who owned next to nothing. They were there to get wisdom from this man who only owned an orange cloth that he wrapped around himself as a robe, some sandals, which he did not take off. He was the only one that got to wear his shoes. What are they going to say to him? And he had a little rope with a little pouch with all of his worldly belongings in it. And I'll just tell you afterwards, I kept staring at that pouch thinking, what worldly belongings does this man have? So I asked him, and he said, very important thing for a monk. And he opened it up and he pulled out, what do you think? Not tissues, not prayer beads, not a driver's license, he didn't drive, not a toothbrush, not a credit card, nail clippers. Very important for a monk, he said. Anyway, but even before he came out, so here we were, this group of entitled, wealthy, powerful, affluent people, all wanting to hear from him. Now, this is an important contrast when we're talking about self-empowerment, and I'll tell you why. There was, in the 20th century, a famous psychoanalyst, a social psychoanalyst named Erich Fromm. Some of you have read him, and probably some of the therapists who are in the room know exactly who I'm talking about. And he wrote a number of famous books. And one of the books he published late in his life, published in 1976, is a book called To Have or to Be. to have or to be. And in this book, what he does is he talks about the two kinds of people that there are. Individually, and as a society, the two kinds of people that there are those who are the havers. And then there are those who are the beers, those who are to have and those are to be. And the havers are people who are interested in, let me get this exactly right. The havers are those who demand, need, and want. They like to possess, they want power, and having is the ultimate goal. That was the group of people that were at this mansion. And then there are the beers. And the beers, they are all about experiencing, about giving, and about personal freedom. For the beers, the experience is more important than the possession is. And this is true on several levels. It's certainly true on the material level. You can see it in the contrast in the story that I'm telling you of these people who had everything, but they needed something from him so that they could feel like he was filling the hole that they had, versus him who had nothing and had nothing that he needed from them. But it's also true on a spiritual level as well. Like, for instance, people who say, I don't want negative people around me. Have you heard that, right? So the havers would say, I don't want, because it's about me, I don't want negative people around me, so negative people have to leave. Can't be around them. Why? Because it's not serving me. And on one level, that's actually a good thing, but what a beer would do is look at it a little bit different and say to themselves, wow, I have negative people around me. What is inside of me that is needing the experience, that is open to the experience of having negative people around me? And the beer would then say, I need to heal this so I can see my wholeness now, so that I don't have an experience of anything outside of myself that can affect what I know to be true for myself. And in so doing, instead of the haver, which says, you are not fulfilling my needs, so therefore you are out, the beer says, I can be it so that I might be the light in your darkness. Different way of going through life. This monk was a beer. There was nothing that he needed, but also he was not affected by the energy of anybody else around him because he was so fully in his being. So there we were, in this place. And he said, the first thing we must do is zazen. That's meditation. And the host rushes over and she says to the monk, I have this beautiful chair for you to sit in. And it was one of those beautiful, big back chairs, and it was upholstered beautifully. It was so gorgeous. And he just looked at her in the chair and sat down right where he was, on the floor. He didn't need that. He didn't need the prop of something. He just sat down where he was. And do you know what we all did? Immediately sat down right where we were. The energy of him was so powerful that we didn't even need his instruction. We just sat down right where we were on the floor. And he led us into meditation. Now, what's important about this, and the reason he wanted to start us in our self-empowerment with meditation, is because we were not going to listen and hear what he had to say when we were still in the to-have mentality. We needed to switch from that to our inner being so we could actually hear and receive what he had to say. Alberto Villoldo in Courageous Dreaming talks about that too. He says the first thing you must do in your journey of self-empowerment is start with silence. Start with mindfulness so that you are entering into the receiving end of your consciousness. Not the needing, wanting, having, but the receiving end. Ernest Holmes, founder of the Science of Mind philosophy, the Center in the Science of Mind textbook, he has his spiritual tool, which is spiritual mind treatment. That's a form of affirmative prayer. 5 steps. The first step is not start where what you need. The first step is beginning in the place of unlimited possibility, the one mind. There is no limitations. It's all freedom. That's where you start. That's so important to start from that place. So here we are. This monk starts us with Zazen meditation, 75 minutes of it. 75 minutes of it. These people were not used to sitting still for 75 minutes, but they did, because he held the energy for all of us to do it. And at the end, he very simply said, "And now we will begin our talk." And even though there was probably 60 people in the room, he didn't need a microphone because the presence of his voice carried through everyone. It was stunning. So there we were, sitting there, listening to him, and he starts to give his Dharma talk. This sweet man. And he just talked very simply, and he sat there, and he talked about what a life of freedom would look like, what a life of empowerment would look like, how we can be free of the desires that hold us back, and that the desires that we have really are ways that we try to fill the holes in our life. And that we can be free of that by recognizing there are no holes, that the holes are part of the whole, W-H-O-L-E. And that as we do that, then we can live a life of freedom and joy, happiness and love, peace. And he just was speaking about this simply. But from him, it was incredibly powerful. And we all were downloading it. All of us except for one lady, who was sitting a little bit to his right, and as he spoke, the calmer he got, the more agitated she got. She was getting very agitated listening to him, and you could just see it. She was twitching, and she was like, and she was doing this and all this, and she kept switching, like she couldn't sit in one cross-legged position, so she had to keep moving around and all this stuff. Very distracting for some of the people around her. And she was just getting more and more distracting, until finally she interrupts him in his talk, and she goes, How do I get these things you are talking about? How do I get this personal freedom? How do I get the empowerment in my life? How do I get this happiness? How do I get this joy? You don't know my life. How do I get this? How am I supposed to get this? And she was very loud, and she was very rambunctious like this, and she was just speaking a mile a minute, and she kept saying, how do I do this? How? And she was demanding it of him, as a haver would do. And he, being in his beingness, just stared at her lovingly. Because when he was looking at her, he was not seeing the haver that was asking the question. He was seeing the being that was inside that already knew the answer. And he just stared at her lovingly the entire time she spoke, yelled at him, did not react. How do I do this? How do I do this? And when she was done, he just stopped, took a breath, and said, How to have all of these things? How to have happiness? How to have joy? How to have self-empowerment and peace? Many hows. How? Big question, how? Big question, how? Big how? And then he stopped and he said, the answer is little how. And in that moment, the entire room shifted, those of us who got it. Because he said in 2 words, little how, the explanation of what she was talking about. She was thinking of something that was so large, so big, that it was freezing her. It was keeping her stuck. She was seeing it as something that she needed from the having point of view. And he switched it over into the being point of view, where we already have all of those things. And from that place, we are now in choice and in power. Little how. And what he meant, too, is that in that space of little how, we don't have to do everything in our lives today, but we have to do everything of today, today. And each day becomes part of the larger tapestry that is the week, which becomes of the larger tapestry, which is the month, which is the larger tapestry of the year, which is the years that make up the tapestry of your life. The whole tapestry is created by each day, by each little how, each little how. So to every how she had, he was just in the place of right here. You already are it, and we get to choose it again and again and again. Every day we choose it anew. I read this interesting statistic recently about toddlers. And toddlers, according to this statistic, in the years of their toddlerhood, are told the word no 40,000 times. And interestingly enough, they are told the word yes 5,000 times. So as toddlers are told the word no 8 times more often than they are told the word yes. Some of that is awesome. Some of that is good, because otherwise, if we didn't have the certain no's, things can happen. And it's true sometimes even as adults, when we get no's from life, that's for our own good. But the interesting thing is, to me, that if as toddlers we are told the word no 8 times more often than the word yes, they were told as toddlers by their parents or educators or adults. But as adults, we tell ourselves no at least 5 times more often than we tell ourselves yes, and we are the ones telling it to ourselves now, right? So the little how for us, the way we dream our new reality, the way that we step into our self-empowerment, is by reminding ourselves every day to live in the yes of life, the yes of life. And as we do that bit by bit, hour by hour, day by day, we create the little how that becomes the big how of one big life. In that place, in that way, we are not living from the third chakra's fears and anxieties, but rather we are living from the clearness of that, which means that we are now moving into the action of movement, achievement, energy, dynamism, willpower. We are now free to move forward into the magnificence that life has created each of us for. So as I close this talk, let me just move into this place and say to you, are you ready to move into your yes today? Yes. Are you ready to let go of so many no's that hold you back, keep you stuck, keep you in the same place, keep you living the same life day after day, month after month, so that you can now have a new and fresh experience, the experience that your soul has for you today? Are you willing to do that now? Yes. Then what we are doing is we are doing what that beautiful monk told those people all those years ago. We are now moving into the big how of our life through every yes, every little how that begins right here and right now. So let's take this into prayer treatment so we can breathe it into being. Alberto Villoldo talks about dreaming it into being, and dreams and breath, so related. So let's breathe deeply. Let's live deeply. Let's know deeply right here and now that we are in that place of yes, that divine yes, that blessing place, the place of unlimitedness. We are in the place of being instead of having. And what's beautiful about being is that in that place of being, paradoxically, we have everything. So we just embrace this part. We just embrace the beingness that we are right here and now. That place that is unlimited, that is filled with the divine energy of life, that touches infiniteness. And we recognize that we each are that personified. Every moment, every day, we get to choose as a little how in our life, another yes, Yes to new experiences. Yes to new life. Yes to new love. It's a new day. We are newly awakened in it right here and now. Fully aware, fully awake, fully alive to the moment. Because this is it. This moment is it. So we fully show up. And we say in our hearts, in our minds, in our whole beings, we say yes to life. We feel it. We express it. And we know it to be true for ourselves. And we know it to be true for everyone in this room, everyone listening. We know that that divine yes is ours so that we feel self-empowered. But the self is a capital S, empowered, right here and right now. We give thanks for this. We release this, knowing it is ours, this divine yes. And together we say, and so it is. Amen.